the largest oil supply disruption in human history. That is what energy experts are now calling the Strait of Hormuz closure. And while headlines focus on fuel prices at the pump, the real crisis is still 6 to 9 months away. Fertiliser shortages, food inflation, agricultural collapse across the Asia-Pacific. Meanwhile, one nation sees opportunity where others see chaos. The UAE is actively recruiting businesses fleeing instability, offering crisis-tested infrastructure, streamlined licensing, and a very different pitch to the world. Coming up on Unbreakable Ventures, why the Strait of Hormuz closure will hit your business harder in 2027 than it does today. How the UAE is turning regional instability into competitive advantage. And in our quick-fire segment where we look at how Europe's energy crisis is deepening, why Domino's Pizza scrambles for cooking gas, Britain's medicine shortages, how insurance gaps leave businesses exposed, and why New Zealand tourism leaders may be missing the point entirely. It is Tuesday, the 7th of April 2026, and we are covering the world's global threats over the last fortnight, so grab a coffee and let's get into it. Welcome to Unbreakable Ventures. I am Ollie Law, and you are listening to our fortnightly risk update where we dive into emerging and current risks from around the world, focusing on some big stories and some you may have missed. We use the categories from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report to simplify the threats we are monitoring, but we also do some deep dives and interviews with industry peers. Let me paint you a picture for our first story this week. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for a month now. 20% of the world's oil flow blocked. 15 to 20% of global natural gas also stopped. But it's not all just about oil and gas. Turns out it's also heavily about fertiliser. The Gulf states supply over 30% of the world's nitrogen and phosphate fertiliser exports, and that supply line just got cut. Now you might be thinking, fertiliser, that is a farming problem, not my problem, I'm in IT. But stay with me because this is about to become everyone's problem. Goldman Sachs issued a warning this week. They are predicting severe agricultural inflation, supply crunches, and cascading impacts across Asia and Oceania. The timeline works like this. Right now, you are seeing fuel and energy prices spike. That is the immediate impact and the one grabbing headlines. In 4 to 8 weeks, fertiliser supply constraints hit agricultural planning. Farmers cannot get the inputs they need for upcoming planting seasons. In 6 to 12 months, reduced agricultural output, food price inflation, cost of living pressures that flow through every part of the economy. That means late 2026 harvests will be smaller. And 2027 will see sustained inflation affecting consumer spending and business confidence. Let us get specific about who gets hit though. In Australia, grain and cattle producers face a triple threat: rising fuel costs for farm machinery and transport, fertiliser shortages affecting soil preparation for winter planting, and increasing feed costs for livestock operations. Industry bodies are already warning of production contractions visible in late 2026 harvests. In New Zealand, the agricultural export sector contributes approximately 80% of goods exports. That entire sector confronts rising input costs. Dairy, meat, horticulture, fertiliser-dependent pastoral farming is particularly vulnerable. And the timing could not be worse. Autumn is the critical application window for fertiliser in the southern hemisphere, and that window is right now. Across Southeast Asia, rice production in Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia faces fertiliser access constraints. Reduced yields during upcoming planting cycles threaten regional food security. And here is where it gets geopolitically complicated. When major rice-producing nations face domestic shortages, they restrict exports. That amplifies global supply tightness. Prices spike further and importing nations scramble for alternatives. So who should be concerned? If you are an agricultural producer or food manufacturer, you face immediate procurement challenges and price escalation. If you lack contracted supply or alternative sourcing, you may face actual input shortages during critical windows. If you are an employer in any sector, cost of living pressures from food and energy inflation will erode your employees' purchasing power. That drives wage pressure, retention challenges, productivity impacts as workers experience financial stress. These effects intensify through late 2026 and into 2027. If you run a consumer-facing business, discretionary spending will contract. Households will redirect budgets toward essential food and energy costs. Retail, hospitality, tourism, entertainment all face demand compression that may not align with current revenue projections. If your business depends on general business confidence, investment decisions will hesitate, contract commitments will stall, expansion plans face uncertainty. Decision paralysis is already setting in among business leaders and financial institutions. So, what can you actually do about this? First, model 12-month cost scenarios now. Build financial projections incorporating sustained energy and food inflation through 2027. Stress test your margins, your cash reserves, your credit facilities. What happens if input costs rise 15 to 30% and consumer demand contracts? Identify your break-even points and your decision triggers for operational adjustments. Second, engage suppliers on forward contracts. Where operationally relevant, explore locking in supply agreements or forward pricing before spot market escalation fully materializes. Accepting premium pricing today may be far better than facing unavailability or extreme pricing 6 months from now. Third, prepare employee cost of living response strategies, develop contingency plans, wage adjustment discussions, benefit enhancements, targeted support programs. Develop contingency plans. Proactive communication about organizational awareness supports retention during uncertainty. Fourth, diversify supplier, geography. Assess whether alternative fertiliser sources from North America, Russia, or North Africa could provide supply continuity. Despite higher transport costs or geopolitical complexity, partial diversification reduces total exposure, even if complete substitution proves impossible. And finally, communicate proactively with stakeholders, boards, investors, leadership teams. They need to understand that current disruption impacts will intensify rather than resolve. Set appropriate expectations for 2027 planning, reflecting probable rather than optimistic assumptions. The Strait of Hormuz closure is not a short-term crisis. It is a slow-moving wave, and the peak impact is still months away. The businesses that recognize this now have time to prepare. Those that do not will find themselves scrambling when the wave arrives.
You are listening to Unbreakable Ventures, a threat intelligence publication by FixInc. Subscribe today via unbreakableventures.com to receive free resource and deep dives from industry experts. Unbreakableventures.com, where resilience is about community and communication. Subscribe today.
Before we move on to our second threat update, we are sharing our quick-fire emerging threats we have picked up throughout the week. These will be noteworthy stories we think you should know about, but less detailed than our two core threats analysed. The European Union faces what energy experts describe as the largest oil supply disruption in market history. Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz is blocking 15 to 20% of global oil and gas flows. Brussels is preparing measures, reduced electricity taxes, grid tariff adjustments. But analysts warn Europe is not being sufficiently transparent with populations about how serious this actually is. Asian nations are already experiencing supply disruptions. Europe's delayed impact arrives within weeks to months. Domino's pizza operator Jubilant FoodWorks has disclosed operational adjustments due to LPG supply constraints from Middle East disruptions. This highlights how energy dependencies ripple through consumer-facing businesses. Food service, manufacturing, retail. All operations dependent on consistent gas supplies face potential service interruptions. Businesses should audit energy supply chains and identify single-source dependencies now. British healthcare faces potential medicine shortages within weeks as Middle East conflict disrupts pharmaceutical supply chains. But the risk extends far beyond developed nations. Reduced global supply and increased Western stockpiling may devastate third world countries heavily reliant on international medical support. When wealthy nations experience scarcity, political pressure to prioritise domestic populations intensifies. Medical aid flowing to nations lacking manufacturing capacity may slow or stop entirely. Current global instability is revealing significant gaps in business interruption insurance. Many policies exclude war, civil unrest, cyber events, supply chain failures. Businesses assuming insurance provides adequate protection may face substantial uninsured losses when claims are denied. The risk compounds as interconnected disruptions trigger cascading failures across multiple coverage categories. Conduct immediate policy reviews with your brokers. New Zealand tourism operators report sharp increases in business costs. Tourism industry Aotearoa's chief executive described the current season's minimal impact as a bit of a blessing, but this misses the critical point. The full effects of the Iran conflict and oil crisis will not materialise for 6 to 9 months. That places maximum impact during the Southern Hemisphere summer of 2027. Not this ski season, not even the start of the summer season, but 2027's hottest month for the country. Businesses planning for that season should model significantly elevated input costs and potential demand compression. Further sources and references can be found in the footnotes of this podcast. But without further ado, let us look at our second threat update this week. While most of the world reacts to crisis, one country is doing something rather different. The United Arab Emirates is actively positioning regional instability as a business advantage, and they are recruiting companies to prove it. This might sound counterintuitive. The Middle East is experiencing significant conflict, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and regional tensions are at their highest in decades. So why would any business move toward the chaos rather than away from it? Because the UAE has spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Here is what is actually happening. Dubai's free zones and Abu Dhabi's industrial clusters are actively recruiting businesses seeking to relocate away from higher risk jurisdictions. Licensing processes that used to take weeks are now measured in days. Regulatory sandboxes are expanding across fintech, healthcare technology, advanced manufacturing. Government-backed business continuity programs offer subsidized crisis management consulting, operational resilience assessments, and access to shared infrastructure facilities. This is particularly valuable for small and medium enterprises lacking resources for independent contingency planning. The Emirates sovereign wealth funds are deploying capital into supply chain resilience infrastructure. Expanded port automation, warehousing capacity, logistics technology platforms, all designed to reduce dependency on single corridor shipping routes, the routes currently affected by regional tensions. And here is the strategic play. The UAE is explicitly targeting businesses reconsidering regional headquarters locations. The incentive packages bundle tax advantages, talent visa streamlining, and guaranteed infrastructure access during regional disruption events. In other words, they are saying, when the next crisis hits, we will keep operating. Will your current location? This has real implications for businesses globally. If you are a regional headquarters decision maker, organizations evaluating Middle East or Asia Pacific hub locations face a narrowing window. Early movers are locking in infrastructure access, regulatory approvals, talent pools. Late entrants will find those resources constrained or unavailable. If you compete against UAE-based businesses, you may face structural cost disadvantages, crisis-tested operations, streamlined logistics, or even government-backed resilience programs. These translate into faster market response and lower operational friction during ongoing regional instability. If you are a supply chain strategist, businesses without Gulf Cooperation Council logistics nodes face increased vulnerability. Shipping route disruptions favor companies with diversified regional distribution networks and pre-positioned inventory in crisis-resilient jurisdictions. If you are hiring internationally mobile professionals, anticipate talent migration toward UAE locations, stability, infrastructure access, quality of life advantages. These become more attractive as alternative regional centers experience disruption. So what should businesses actually consider here? First, evaluate your regional hub strategy against crisis resilience criteria. Assess whether current headquarters and operational centre locations provide adequate business continuity during sustained regional instability. Map your dependencies, infrastructure, logistics corridors, regulatory environments. Ask whether competitive disadvantages are emerging against rivals positioned in crisis-resilient jurisdictions. Second, if regional diversification aligns with your strategic objectives, engage UAE trade and investment authorities. Establish preliminary discussions with relevant free zone authorities and investment promotion agencies before preferential terms and infrastructure access become constrained. Early engagement provides optionality without commitment. Third, stress test your supply chain against Gulf region scenarios. Model operational impacts of sustained logistics disruption through traditional corridors. Identify whether pre-positioned inventory, alternative distribution nodes, or diversified supplier relationships would provide meaningful competitive advantage during extended regional instability. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is not an endorsement of any particular location decision. Every business has unique requirements, geographic considerations, strategic priorities. But the UAE's positioning raises important questions for any organisation. What happens to your operations during sustained regional disruption? How do your competitors benefit from infrastructure you lack? And are you making location decisions based on historical assumptions that may no longer hold? The businesses asking these questions now have options. Those that wait until crises forces their hand typically do not. That's it for today's update. If you need help navigating these threats or building a plan to protect your business, the same advisors who collate these insights are here to help. Head over to unbreakableventures.com to book a complimentary chat online with one of them. And if you found this resource useful, consider subscribing to Unbreakable Ventures or sharing the article with your network. After all, resilience is about community and communication. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe.
Unbreakable Ventures is brought to you by the Senior Advisory Team at Fixing, a boutique resilience advisory based in the Oceania, ASEAN and India regions. Special thanks to our sponsor and Europe's leading SaaS provider for resilience software, F24. Our resources are researched and published by industry specialists across New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia and the UK. This podcast provides advice and opinion on disaster recovery and the threat landscape. The content is not a substitute for expert guidance during a crisis. Unbreakable Ventures is trademarked by Fixing Consulting Partners, a Fixing Group company.